Welcome to the Trapped Podcast, where we dispel the myths and misinformation that have got you trapped in your fitness journey. We'll break down the science, practice, and application of strength training, conditioning, and everything in between so that we can set you free. I'm your host, Trapper Steinley. Today's episode is all about strength training periodization, and we'll be walking through the phases that make up a well-rounded strength program, from general physical preparedness, GPP, all the way to power. Whether you're new to the gym or an experienced lifter, there's something in here for you. In this episode, we'll discuss periodization, we'll define an effective model for progressing your strength training throughout the phases, and we'll make it applicable by highlighting common missteps, as well as differentiating between experienced and less experienced athletes and their approach at each phase of training. We'll provide an overview in this episode that'll serve as a platform for future episodes where we'll take a deep dive into each phase of training. Okay, so what is periodization? Let's start with a definition. Periodization is the systematic planning of athletic or physical training. It's the structuring of training over a period of time to maximize performance and minimize injury. Whether you're training for a specific goal like a powerlifting competition or just to be stronger and fitter, periodization ensures that you don't hit plateaus and it keeps you improving over time. Think of it like a blueprint. Each phase builds on the previous one, and by the end, you've laid the groundwork to hit peak strength and power. But it's not that simple. Here's where many recreational lifters go wrong. They jump straight into heavy lifting without laying a solid foundation, or they train aimlessly without a long-term plan. You wouldn't build a house without digging a hole and pouring a foundation, nor would you expect to complete the project if you didn't have plans to follow. So, how do we lay the foundation in the gym? Well, by beginning with the end in mind and taking the time to prepare ourselves for success. So let's begin by outlining general physical preparedness. Phase 1 of periodization is general physical preparedness, or GPP. This phase focuses on building a strong foundation of fitness. It's where you develop your overall work capacity, your endurance, your mobility, and your flexibility. The goal here is to prepare your body to handle more specific and intense training further on down the line. It truly is starting with the basics, but there are some common mistakes we see in this phase. For example, it's easy to overlook this phase altogether. Many recreational lifters skip GPP or don't take it seriously. They may focus on lifting too heavy or may jump straight into complex exercises without first addressing basic fitness. The GPP phase can feel boring and tedious, but it's essential for injury prevention, especially for less experienced lifters. Another mistake that's common to all phases of training is neglecting recovery, both during the workout and within your weekly structure. Many recreational lifters do not focus enough on recovery. GPP can be physically demanding, and not allowing proper recovery can lead to burnout before you even reach the more specific phases. As for the differences here between novice and experienced lifters understand the importance of this phase. They'll take time to build aerobic capacity, mobility, and core strength, where less experienced lifters might skip it altogether, thinking that they're wasting their time by not lifting heavy. Phase 2 of periodization is strength endurance. Following GPP, athletes should transition to this. In this phase, you're building muscular endurance and the ability to maintain strength over time. This is particularly important if your goal involves sustained work, like competitive sports or endurance events. In the gym, this means lifting lighter weights for more repetitions. Think sets of 12 to 15 reps. Some common mistakes we see in this phase. First is training with too much weight. A lot of recreational lifters err toward too much weight rather than not enough. They're often afraid of losing strength by lifting lighter weights, or they think that high reps are for bodybuilders only. But the goal here isn't to max out. It's to build stamina, which requires consistent mechanics for high reps. This leads us to another common mistake, which is skipping form for volume. Many recreational lifters tend to sacrifice form just to complete the repetitions. High rep training requires strict form, and doing this wrong can lead to overuse injuries. The more times you practice poor behavior, the easier it is to develop bad habits. As for the difference between novice and experienced lifters here, an experienced lifter knows how to balance intensity and volume, using enough weight to challenge endurance, but not so much that they compromise form. A novice might not understand how to properly gauge this. In fact, it's been my experience that less experienced lifters don't have a great sense of their rate of perceived exertion, RPE, which results in inappropriate weight selection, both too heavy and too light. Phase 3 of periodization is hypertrophy. Following strength endurance, athletes should transition to this, which is where 95% of recreational lifters gravitate and unfortunately stagnate. This phase is where the goal shifts to muscle growth. Here, it's all about increasing the size of your muscles, and while research shows that hypertrophy can be achieved with as little as 5 repetitions up to as many as 30 repetitions, you're typically lifting in the 8 to 12 rep range. This is also the phase where you should prioritize time under tension and maximizing muscle damage for growth. A common mistake we see in this phase is using too little intensity. Without realizing what it takes to achieve muscle damage, we commonly see athletes not pushing hard enough. Recreational lifters might struggle to transition out of the previous phase and still be training too light or just going through the motions when hypertrophy requires pushing your muscles close to failure. An additional mistake is a lack of planned variety when it comes to exercises. We are creatures of habit, but in the weight room, this presents as not enough pattern variation. To maximize growth, you need to hit muscles from different angles and include a mix of compound and isolation exercises in a systematic way. As for the difference here between novice and experienced lifters understand how to use various rep ranges, angles, and tempos to fully develop muscle groups. Novices might stick to the same routine and plateau quickly because they're not challenging their muscles in new ways. This is where people might not want to admit that they've been stuck in a rut so long, they've finally found their groove. Phase 4 periodization is max strength. Once we've developed bigger, stable muscles and have proficient mechanics, we move into the max strength phase. This is where you train to lift the heaviest weight possible for low repetitions, usually in the 1 to 5 rep range. The goal here is neural adaptation, teaching your nervous system to recruit more muscle fibers to generate force. Common mistakes we see in this phase: first, going too heavy with your lifts without proper form. One of the biggest mistakes recreational lifters make is lifting too heavy without mastering form. This phase is high risk for injury if you're not technically proficient. Additionally, athletes in this phase do not allow for enough rest. Not allowing adequate rest in between sets is detrimental in this phase, particularly because max strength requires long rest periods, sometimes in the 3 to 5 minute range. But many recreational lifters cut it short and miss out on potential strength gains. As for the difference between novice and experienced lifters here, experienced lifters know when and how to lift heavy safely. They understand how to use proper form under heavy loads. They manage fatigue well by incorporating adequate rest periods. Novices, however, often rush their sets and sacrifice form, risking injury. Finally, our training periodization culminates with phase 5, power development. Power is all about moving weight explosively. You're training your muscles to contract as fast as possible, which is crucial for sports performance. This phase involves lighter weights, usually 50 to 60% of your 1 rep max, and sometimes more depending on the specific movement, but the focus here is on speed of movement. Some common mistakes we see in this phase: confusing power with strength. It's a common misconception thinking that power training is just lifting heavy quickly, but power is all about speed. You need to reduce the load in order to move it explosively. Additionally, recreational lifters in this phase will neglect technique. Power moves like cleans or snatches are very technical. Recreational lifters often neglect proper technique, which can lead to ineffective training and quite possibly injury. As for the difference here between novice and experienced lifters understand the balance between load and speed. They focus on technique and acceleration, while novices might try to lift too heavy and slow themselves down. So, let's wrap it up with some common themes that we see across all phases. As we've discussed, there are a few common mistakes and differences we see across all phases of periodization. Number 1, lack of a long-term plan. Many recreational lifters don't prioritize or periodize their training. They jump from one style of training to the next without any structure, or they get stuck in a phase for way too long, leading to plateaus. 2, undervaluing recovery. Recovery is just as important as training. You need to allow your muscles and nervous system time to adapt, especially when you're lifting heavy. Recovery includes everything from timing your rest intervals, to deloading within a phase, to planning your nutrition to support your objectives, and to prioritizing sleep. And number 3, inconsistent effort. One of my favorite things to say about athletes is that most of us don't make our easy days easy enough and our hard days hard enough. Experienced lifters know when to push hard and when to dial it back, depending on the phase of training. Less experienced lifters might either push too hard all the time, leading to burnout, or not hard enough, leading to stagnation. So there you have it. An overview of strength training periodization from GPP to power. Regardless of where you are in your fitness journey, understanding these phases and how to approach them can make a massive difference in your progress. Hopefully by listening to this podcast, you've begun to question how effective you are being with your training and picked up some nuggets that you can apply to your own program. And if you're looking for more in-depth information or even personalized guidance, you can check us out at 22fitness.com to book a consultation with one of our trainers. Otherwise, stay tuned for continued content and a deeper dive into each phase we discussed today. Thanks for tuning into the Trapped podcast, where we aim to set you free. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next set.